Welcome to another special edition of Learn Analytics podcast. Today we have a very special guest. His name is Zach Henlin, and he is currently the CEO and co-founder of Zing Data. And some of his previous roles he had held at VP of Product at One Signal, and also spent some time as a product manager at LinkedIn and over at Facebook. Yeah, it's great to have you, Zach. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Hubert. Excited to be on the show.
Great, great. Yeah. Let's dive right into it. Like how did you get into data and product? Like what's your story?
Yeah, so I actually always, I wasn't amazing at math, but I really liked data and statistics. And so I went to college at Berkeley. And when I realized that there was like this cool thing called econometrics, and you could like answer what percent of variability was explainable by someone's age or by which state they were coming from or whatever, I was like, wow, this is a whole set of tools to understand the world in a much more rigorous and precise way than I ever knew was possible. And so actually ended up applying for PhD programs, almost did my PhD, got into a bunch of places, deferred for a year, and realized that I wanted something that was a little bit more hands-on and a little bit more practical than like a faster turnaround time than a paper, right? You publish a paper, could take a year to get published. Whereas instead what I did was I went and joined a big management consulting firm, Oliver Wyman, actually based out of Singapore. And their projects would be really interesting kind of quantitative projects. So you'd say like, hey, if we lower the price to transact on a stock exchange, how much more volume do we think we're going to get on the stock exchange? So kind of a mix of strategy and kind of the econometrics and statistics work. But in terms of anybody who maybe is already graduated or is looking to get into data analytics, a great way to do that is learn some SQL, learn a little bit of R or Python, and play with a data viz tool or two. And you can kind of get enough of a background to actually be credible when you're interviewing for roles and stuff like that. Most of my undergrad was like theorems and all sorts of stuff that I don't use much at all today. So the basics of actually doing it at a practical level. Coming out of undergrad, go to consulting. So I did that. And then when you've been a consultant and still don't know what you want to do, go to business school. So I did that at MIT. And then that's really where I got back into wanting to actually build stuff. I'd like to build stuff when I was a kid. And when I did hackathons and got into Y Combinator when I was in college, didn't go. But MIT was really a chance to get back into building stuff. And I think that's a great mindset for folks to have if they are trying to switch into data analytics. Like just go find a data set, go figure out something interesting about it, share it with your friends, share it on LinkedIn. And eventually, as you get more reps on something, you'll get back into that groove. So business school, interestingly enough for me, was a way to get back into the groove of building stuff. And that's actually where I met my now current founder. And then after that, worked at Facebook, shipped their first work in speech recognition. Yeah. Now powers like transcriptions on newsfeed, shipped a bunch of ranking and relevance improvements at LinkedIn, and worked at a startup. And that's actually where I actually built out a sort of basics of an analytics function from scratch. And that was a really interesting experience because I hadn't done that before. You go into a big company and everything is sorted out, right? Like there's huge analytics teams and data infra they've spent 5 or 10 years building. You go to a startup and you're like, hey, we have one database, and that's our production database that we're using to actually run the site or run the service. And so if we run a really big query that takes that down or slows that down, then we might actually be negatively impacting the service.
Got it. No, I mean, like you summarized a lot of very interesting experiences, right? Like you coming from in the beginning, your undergrad was very econometrics, right? With math and stats and very heavy. But then you sort of like went into management consulting role, right? And then you did business school, and then you joined pretty much tech, these tech companies at that time of Facebook and LinkedIn scaling up, right? These are still fairly new products, still, getting up there. It's really interesting, even when I, reached out to you and we had a chat, I think like your insight would be really awesome. I think maybe one of my questions is, as you transition into these different roles, right? How did you, especially from business school to these tech jobs, right? So like, how do you look at school, like for people who are like doing graduate degrees, right? And maybe
Yep.
data analytics or maybe computer science, and then like their first job outside of school, right? Like what was
Yeah.
sort of your biggest learning, and how was that sort of shift or pivot or change?
So I think a great way to stand out as a candidate, but B also to just get better is sort of start doing the job that you want. So as an example, in the time I was doing my MBA, I actually worked on a startup in the machine learning space. It was machine learning applied to customer support questions. And so, did hackathons, wrote a bunch of code, took some CS coursework, did a startup competition. We like won a data prize and so those are really ways to go from saying, hey, I'd like to do a startup, or hey, I'd like to work on building a product. Like, go do it, right? The set of tools out there, whether it's data or running a company, are pretty great, and most of them are free. So on the data side, right, you can you could run MySQL instance or Postgres on your own local computer, or there's other like services where you can run a version in the cloud. You can get Python for free, you can get R for free, you can get free versions of data viz tools. Like, you can start doing that and playing with that even before you kind of formally have that education. And similarly, if you want to do something in tech, like, even if you don't know how to code, you could go take like a Udacity course or watch YouTube videos or whatever it is, and start getting reps there. And in fact, we recently were hiring a designer, and the thing we look at, they were someone coming straight out of school, right? So we don't have like a huge work experience portfolio to look at. But what we did is we had projects that person had done in their portfolio. And so you could think about it as like, start building your portfolio, whether that's a hackathon project, whether that's a visualization for a student group that you do, or on-campus function, right? Like, figure out ways. If you offer to do something cool for someone for free, oftentimes they'll say yes. And that's a great way of building up credibility and really, more importantly, experience to like be great at the job that you want to get when you come out, whether that's software engineering or data science. As an example for me, separate from the kind of coursework I had, I was like, hey, I'd like to make a little bit of money. And so I found there was like a role at a hedge fund in San Francisco, BlackRock. It's now BlackRock. It used to be called Barclays Global Investors. And they ran big like investment vehicles. So they ran iShares, which is a big exchange traded fund. And that got me into being familiar with Bloomberg and MATLAB and all these other things, which might not have been part of like the core statistics education I was getting at Berkeley, but started getting me very, very relevant for industry.
Yeah. Got it. I really like how you sort of like said around getting reps in, right? It's not like,
yeah. It's like anything. If you want to be a great chef, like the first meal they cook is probably not amazing. If you want to be a bodybuilder, like the first time you lift weights, you're probably not like super buff. And if you want to be, a great software engineer, you've probably like actually debugged a lot of stuff and worked through a lot of stuff before you get, pretty good and pretty fast and have good software architecture and engineering principles. So like, it's a lot of it is like, do something, and then the second important piece of it is get feedback on that, right? Whether you're building a machine learning system, I mean, basically, the way when I was, to skip a couple steps, when I was working on newsfeed at LinkedIn, you have a model, and then you have a bunch of data that tells you like, is that model doing better, right? So are people spending more time on this content or clicking on it more or commenting or posting more? So you have data that's informing iteration iteration that you do. So you say, hey, I have this new model for how to rank your newsfeed. And then I have all this data on my new model, and I compare that to my previous model and say, well, is it better on the things I care about? And you could do the same thing by saying, hey, I have this startup idea. I put up a landing page for it. Did one person sign up or did 100 people sign up? Yeah. Or I wrote this code that's supposed to do X. Did it do it in 5 seconds of runtime or 50 seconds of runtime? And so, you can think about yourself even and your learning process is basically a set of experiments with a feedback loop. Yeah. And then you get feedback and you much like a machine learning model over time and reinforcement learning, you get closer and closer over time as you get more examples and more feedback.
Yeah, no, I'm spot on. I think just like that, right? Like if I think back, 5 or 6 years when I started, I did grad degree in analytics, right? And I was like, in the beginning, it's like you do these projects, right? You do these things. And then now it's like, once you develop that, got those reps in, now you're much more experienced at it. You can look at, okay, if I'm going to slice this data, I know I'm going to look at this viewpoint, that viewpoint, this viewpoint. Like it's so gradual. Like once you get into habit of it.
Did you feel ready from your degree alone, or did you feel like there was a
No, it had to be the experience, it had to be those 4 or 5 years after that. The degree was just like, give you some technical skills, right? But it's really, like you said, build those reps in, right? Like after years of, being a data analyst in different industries, right?
And a lot of times the degree will teach you like maybe the technical pieces of, okay, here's what a confidence interval is. Here's what a random sample and sample size selection is. Here's even, on the fancier side, min max or gradient descent or whatever it is, depending how fancy you want to get. It doesn't teach you typically that if you go and show a super data dense slide to most audiences, their eyes are probably going to glaze over. And it doesn't teach you that you probably need to translate what that number is into what it means for the business if you actually want people to pay attention in most contexts.
Yeah, it's the story, right? Storytelling, right? Data storytelling. That's like,
yeah, or even like cleaning data. Like,
oh yeah,
you could have a data question, and if your data is clean, you could be able to answer it sometimes in like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, right? You do some relatively simple stats on it, and you can figure out an answer. Oftentimes you'll realize that it's not, and you in industry have a database of users and their actions, a database of maybe marketing stuff you've done, a database of sales stuff. None of those have the same identifiers, so even joining them and getting the right join keys and stuff like that is non-trivial, or the right data pipelines to pull that all together. And so a lot of time goes into setting up what would, if you were in a class or something, maybe just be a nice data set that someone hands you to, go do analysis on.
Yeah. No, I think that's also a big shift, right? Like you said, in a class, data sets are clean. Like even if you go on Kaggle and stuff like that, a lot of it is pretty nice. But the thing is, like, if you actually work in industry, like you'll be spending quite a bit of time just like finding, like getting the right clean data, then performing the right analysis, right?
And one other thing that I figured out in industry is it's very easy to waste a lot of time on bad questions. So, and this was not obvious to me when I first started, but I do think over time I realized a good follow-on question for almost any data analyst to ask, and more senior people typically do this, more junior folks are less aware to do this, is how will this influence your thinking? Or if it's X, what would you do? If it's Y, what would you do? Because it's very easy to say, oh, let's go look into that. And you could spend a week looking into some data without it actually being very clear how that's going to drive a decision or change a decision. So a good way to get better at how you use your time. And this goes for product managers, this goes for designers. If you say, hey, I want a bunch of design explorations. A fair question to ask is, how will a super deep analysis on this versus a quick answer change, the actions you might take, because it allows you to calibrate where you want to focus your time and really, like, is it worth it to spend a long time on a very detailed question, or actually is it sort of a passing curiosity that someone has in a meeting? And so a good way to kind of think about that is what is the decision we're looking to make based on this? Or is this kind of just more informative, which is fine, but it can help you like calibrate the next set of questions that you may need to answer. So if someone says, hey, I'm gonna look at the analysis you have on the churn of our users to figure out if we should be hiring a customer success team to try and make sure they're successful so they don't churn as much. Well, okay, cool. A fair question, a follow-on question is, once I look at churn, how many people are churning? What would be the cost of us hiring a customer support team based on the number of customers we have and how long we think it's going to take to support a given customer? And so ask sort of the why behind what seems like the kind of trivial question that you're going to do an analysis on, because that will help you up level as a data scientist or as a data analyst or as a PM, and it will get you thinking about like how that data, how that output actually gets used.
Yeah. No, great insight there. Yeah, let's transition a little bit. Definitely want to learn a little bit more about what you're building.
Sure.
So let's talk about you started this company how long ago? Pretty recent.
Yeah. So actually, about a year and a half ago, I was talking to a friend that I knew from 10 years back. We'd gone to business school together, and we actually had hacked on a project. So going back to what I was saying before of like, when you're in college, or even if you're not in college, you can go to startup meetups or founder meetups and just find other people who want to build stuff. Facebook groups, YC has a thing called Startup School that's totally free. And they have like a co-founder match thing. Like if you go and say, hey, I want to talk to other people or work with other people to build something, that's a great way to find folks who want to do a startup. But I luckily knew my co-founder going back about 10 years, and we'd worked on hacking on an idea together 10 years ago in the data space. And about a year and a half ago, we started talking and realized, he'd done well in his career. I'd done well in mine. He sold 2 companies. He was director of engineering. I was VP product at a startup, and I built out a data team, and we realized he'd also built out a data team. And we realized that, like, regardless of where we worked, we had experienced the same set of frustrations around data. Yeah. Namely, it was hard for most people at a company to use. Right? You have a data analyst team or data scientist, kind of relatively small percentage of the company who actually has the tools and the experience to kind of ask questions of data. And most of the things out there were sort of like either writing SQL based or R or Python or whatever, or at the very least they were like desktop software, right? Things like Tableau, Power BI. You can only like ask a question on a Windows machine. If you have a Mac, your Power BI doesn't run to create a dashboard or whatever on a Mac. And over the last 10 years, we've seen a transformation in how people kind of get work done. So it used to be desktop, single player. Think Microsoft Word. For design, it was Sketch. And now it's Google Docs, right? Which is accessible anywhere, multiplayer, right? So you want a colleague to weigh in on something, they weigh in right there. Or for design, Sketch, which was single player, is now, most folks are using Figma, which is kind of multiplayer and accessible on the web and pretty lightweight to start figuring out. And kind of had this free to try, model. And so we knew the time was right to do that for data. And the things we wanted to do were make it, free for folks to be able to start using and querying data. We wanted to make it accessible on mobile, because it turns out folks spend more than 4 hours a day on mobile. So we're actually the first platform that lets you not just view an existing dashboard, but literally in a couple taps and swipes, query a database. And the genesis of the idea was I was in a meeting a couple years ago, and someone said, "Hey, where should we be putting our marketing dollars?" And the following question was, where are we growing fastest by users, and where are we growing fastest by revenue? And the idea was like, if we're growing fast by users but not fast by revenue, that's where we should be like putting more salespeople to transition our free users to paid users. So we're in this meeting, most of the folks on the exec team were there, and I knew we had the data because I'd just been involved in building all this data infrastructure, and we got Airflow running, we got Python notebooks up and running, we had replicas of the database and daily aggregates and all this infrastructure. And we realized that like no one had the answer to that question. So we went through this whole meeting, got to the end, made decisions, and never actually looked at the data because it was going to be a good amount of work to do. Like none of us had our laptops with us. The sales guy wasn't going to write SQL. The CEO was busy with other stuff. And I just had this realization that was like, I know this data exists because I've seen it in the databases and structured it that way and queried it before. But what if it was like a couple swipes and a couple taps on your phone, right? Like you buy or sell a stock on Robinhood and it's a couple taps, it's a couple swipes, or post something to Instagram. What if the easy questions in data could be that easy? On your phone, visual. If you have a big data set, we automatically will take the top results. If it's a long running query, we'll send you a push notification when it's ready. What if we could just take the complexity and try to handle that for folks and make it really easy for them to say, how many of my users did this in the last week? How many of my customers who paid me last month did not pay me this month, right? And literally make that a 30-second thing. And so we built mobile-first collaborative business intelligence that's free to get started for the first 10 people at your company, and then $5 a month per person after that. And we use it to run our own business. But I think the fascinating thing is we've seen it open up a whole new realm of data users. So we expected it to be used by like, people like I was, like a VP of product at a startup or something like that, and by tech companies. But what we saw is that we had signups by like someone on an ops team that runs events, or someone at a trucking and logistics company. Yeah. And these are folks that we hadn't built the product initially thinking about, but it turns out all these people who you would think about as like deskless, most of their work is not done at a computer. They actually want to use data to do their jobs better. Yeah. But up till now, they just haven't had the tools because everything was based on desktop and was frankly skewed towards data folks.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting. Like how you started first, the genesis of the idea, right? And then it resonates back to the whole story, right? Like just hack things, right? That's how you...
Yeah, and I'll tell you, like, we didn't start out saying, hey, we need to like go get incorporated and we need to go like pitch all these investors and all this stuff. We started out with like, hey, what could we quickly prototype something in that would work on iOS and Android? So there's a couple languages, but we used Flutter, which lets you build something, write code in Dart, and have it compile to iOS and Android. So basically you get both mobile platforms with a single code base. You can also do that with like React, and there's other ways to do it. But we said, okay, what's a lightweight way we could like start testing this idea? We can build something. We can also talk to people. So you talk to like 50 data analysts, heads of data science, BI analysts, heads of product managers, all that stuff. And really just started figuring out like, is this just me? Am I just solving my own problem, or would I be solving a problem that other people have too? And so all that stuff you can do without any venture capital, without any college degree, without any master's degree. Like these are all free tools out there on the web. And if you want to do something, like start.
Yeah.
Uh, and so we started and then showed it to people, showed it to our friends, got it to a point where we had enough of a thing we could like show on our phone to a friend, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," or like, "Oh, I have a friend I want to tell this about." And then at some point, you're like, "Okay, to turn this into like a real company, we should quit our jobs and build this and raise some money and kind of professionalize it." But the beginnings were, you could call it a night and weekend hack project.
Yeah. I think one of the things that stuck out is like that you had that, you and your co-founder had that mindset around it, right? You had that experience, right? Like you understood like, whoa, this is a big problem, right? But then you also took it from a data approach, right? You went to actually talk to
Yeah. So you can running a startup is largely a series of validating and invalidating hypotheses.
yeah.
So we think this is a problem. Okay, that's the hypothesis. Let's go talk to people. Let's talk to 50 people. If 0 out of 50 of the people we think would be our target user say it's a problem, then maybe it's not a problem. Maybe you should hypothesize a different problem. If a critical mass of those 50 say like, yeah, like that actually is a problem, or like, yes, this would save me time or would help me, then like, in the same way you have hypothesis testing and statistics, right? You're amassing data to get more confident about your hypothesis. And that's actually a really good way to think about it, because it's otherwise it's kind of easy to fall in love with a problem or your solution to it, even before you validated that that's a super valuable problem to solve, right? You can take it personally if someone says they don't like this idea or they wouldn't use it. If you view it as like, oh, they're rejecting my idea, maybe you feel bad about that.
Yeah.
But if you view it as like, okay, this is data that I'm getting that helps me refine my hypothesis and determine that a critical mass of people don't think this is valuable to them, then I've just invalidated my hypothesis rather than had my idea attacked or whatever it is. So I think it's a really good mindset for founders, even if you're sort of a data analyst and you build something and your dashboard is hard to read and confusing and you get feedback to that effect, like, okay, my hypothesis was that this was good and clear, but let me take that feedback and let me iterate on that and let me come back with a new update to that people can respond to. And it's kind of like getting a lot of reps in. It's basically getting a lot of reps on your idea or your dashboard or your analysis in, so that over time you kind of get much more precise about the problem you're solving and for whom.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think, like just not gather enough feedback, right? Like gather from one person who works in this type of role, gather feedback who might work in another role, right? Like then, same approach, right?
Yeah, and I will say, like, be open. So we ended up finding that some of our early users were not, tech companies. They were like what you would think of as more traditional businesses. I would have not expected a trucking company to sign up in the early days. We weren't marketing to them. We weren't putting any content out there. I've never driven a large truck. And that wasn't kind of where we were focused. But when we put something out there and we told people about it and we posted about it and we went on product hunt, people discover it. And so I think sometimes people are like very secretive about their ideas and if someone's to steal my idea, like most of building a successful startup is not in the idea, it's in the execution. And so getting feedback sooner helps you validate or invalidate that hypothesis much sooner, or at least accumulating more data towards that. An exception for like if you're building like a new nuclear reactor technology or fission reaction or something that's like got huge IP moats, maybe it's different and maybe you don't want to like share your idea at cocktail parties with your friends. But for most kind of SaaS type ideas, a lot of it is in the execution, right? It was Facebook versus Friendster. It was, Google versus Ask.com. The idea of a search engine was not a breakthrough. The idea of how to execute on it better with PageRank and stuff for Google versus how other folks were doing it was the breakthrough.
Cool. Yeah, I only have 2 more questions, and we only have 5 more minutes left here. So, question 1 is, I guess, what's next? Like, in this, in Zing Data, like, how does the rest of the year roadmap, or what you're? I see the the vision is really to get folks who don't need to be technical and could just swipe and use it on the mobile phone. So what's coming in the horizon?
Yeah, so the vision is really that you go from 5 people or 10 people, right, the BI team at a company, to everybody being able to use this wherever they are. And if you think about, how something like TikTok made it easy to create video. So like video editing, if you've ever done video editing in iMovie or Final Cut Pro, it takes a lot of time. And then you like go to TikTok and like record something and add some, sound to it, and it sounds nice and it's pretty good. Like they took a thing and made it from a small subset of folks to kind of generally available and generally easy. So we're doing that for data, and we're seeing signs that that's working and who signs up and all that. So the roadmap is really think about the things a great data scientist does, right? They analyze a thing, they distill it down instead of just like showing you 1,000 bars on a bar chart. They figure out like which ones matter the most. Maybe those are like the highest variance ones. So we actually have logic in place where if you run a super long query and I have a couple group bys, we automatically in the background do like a windowing function, which is a thing in SQL you can use to like get the highest ranking. You can rank the contributors. So like if you had 1,000 products and you said, show me the top 5, it's not just a limit of 5, it's the 5 that are the biggest contributors to, let's say, revenue or something like that. So we do that in the background by basically optimizing the query that gets run. Or if you run a huge query and say, oh, I want to visualize this. Well, we actually show like the biggest things first. If we know something's a date, we graph that on the x-axis. We do a bunch of the stuff that like a data analyst or data scientist would do. And we want to make it so more and more of the stuff a data analyst or data scientist would do or data engineer would do, you can do in a couple taps on the app. So for instance, let me know when the new day's value drops or goes up. Let me know when I'm dropping below my value for this a year ago, right? In the background, that might actually be like a data pipeline and statistical significance calculations. But we want to make that literally a single tap on your phone. Let me know and you'll get a push notification type thing.
Got it. Awesome. Yeah. Final question I usually ask all the guests. So if you're like, a new grad, right, or someone who's trying to switch, pivot into data, what's sort of like one advice you would give? I think you already gave it earlier, but ask that again here.
So I think the primary piece of advice would be just start doing it. So if you want to get a job that's more technical as like a data scientist, right? Learn R, learn Python, like figure out make sure you know what a window function is, know what a view is, like make sure you have the technical chops and get the reps in there. But when I used to do a lot of interviewing for product managers, and I would always say a good interview question is, what's a product you use or like, and how would you make it better? Or what's a problem in your life, and what software would you build to solve it? And you could think about kind of a similar variant of that for a data scientist, which is like, what's a product you use? What would you want to analyze about that to figure out if you were a data scientist on the team, if it's working? Or what analysis could you put together not having the internal company data that would inform the management team of something like that, of the competitive space? And so you can start doing all this stuff. You can start playing with the data, hacking on a project. And the tools are out there, whether that's free BigQuery credits or Redshift credits or AWS credits, or I'll give a brief plug for Zing. So zingdata.com, zingdata.com. We have a free tier, free for actually up to 10 people at a company. And, that's really wedded to the idea that I have that we want to make it easy and accessible for folks to get started, right? And then if you become a huge company and you're using our product, like, yeah, you'll pay us. But the idea is, you can go start writing SQL in our tool. You can start visualizing stuff from a database. Go get started, and you'll learn a lot. And frankly, when you're interviewing or even doing your work in industry, you'll be a lot better at it than kind of, literally the amount of stuff I use from a theorem I learned a long time ago is pretty low. So
yeah. No, thank you. Yeah, sorry we had to cut off here, but at the last minute. But I really appreciate. I think all the viewers appreciate, us doing this podcast. I think
thanks so much for putting this together, Hubert. It's a great service for the community and for folks who want to learn about data.
Yeah, we'll be on the lookout to check out for more product developments with Zing Data. It's really exciting. So
thanks so much, Hubert.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.